My brother asked me to scam our parents out of $80,000, but when I exposed him, my father disinherited him, and now he works for me as punishment. I'm 28 years old, I work in logistics, and I'm about to launch my own shipping company. And I need to tell this story because what happened a few months ago with my brother basically blew up our family in a way I never imagined. And the thing is, it all started on what was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life, when I announced my engagement and that I was going to be a father, but it ended up turning into this horrible drama that still has me thinking about whether I did the right thing or not. I guess I should start at the beginning. When Matthew, my older brother, got married like 5 years ago. He's 30 now, so 2 years older than me, and we were always close when we were younger, typical brothers who fought about stupid stuff, but at the end of the day had each other's backs. Our parents, Jonathan and Elizabeth, are good people, honestly. My dad was a cardiovascular surgeon. He's retired now. And my mom was a journalist. Worked at various media outlets until she decided to stay home when we were teenagers. We weren't millionaires, but we never lacked anything. Like we had a comfortable life, vacations every year, good schools, that kind of thing. Everything changed when Matthew met Kimberly. She's 29 years old, and from the beginning I felt there was something off about her. I don't know, like she was always measuring everything in terms of money and appearances, you know what I mean? But well, my brother was in love, and when they got married 5 years ago, I thought, okay, maybe I'm wrong about her. Maybe she just needs time to adjust to the family. But no. After the wedding, Matthew started distancing himself from us in a super gradual but constant way. At first it was small excuses, that he couldn't come to Sunday dinners because the in-laws had an event, that they were busy with the new house, that Kimberly wasn't feeling well. But over time it became obvious that he had basically chosen her family over us. And look, I understand it. To a certain extent, when you get married your priority is your wife. I totally get that. But this was different. Matthew stopped calling Mom on her birthday, started missing Christmases, and when he did show up, it was like out of obligation. He'd arrive late and leave early. My parents were devastated, especially Mom, who's super emotional and blamed herself thinking she had done something wrong. Dad, who's more stoic, like a surgeon who doesn't show much of what he feels, was also hurt, but showed it less. I tried to talk to Matthew a couple of times during those 5 years. I'd text him, call him, but the conversations were always short and superficial. It was like I was talking to an acquaintance instead of my brother. Meanwhile, I continued with my life, working in logistics for a big company, learning everything I could about the shipping business, because I always had this dream of having my own company someday. And I was with Natalie, my girlfriend of 7 years. She's 26. She's amazing, super grounded and realistic, and basically she's my best friend besides being my partner. We met in college. She studied business administration, and I studied industrial engineering, and from the beginning, we connected in a way I had never felt with anyone else. She's one of those people who tells you the truth even if it hurts, but always from a place of love, Last year, things started aligning for me professionally. I got some investors interested in my business idea. I had the business plan ready. I'd been researching the market for years. And, basically, I was about to launch my own shipping company, specialized in international commerce. And, personally, things were going well too. Natalie and I were at a super solid point in our relationship. We'd been living together for like 3 years, and I knew I wanted to marry her. I was just waiting for the perfect moment. That moment came a few months ago. I proposed to her on a weekend. We went to the beach. Nothing super elaborate but significant for us, because it was the same place where we'd had our first date 7 years ago. She said yes, obviously, and we were super happy planning to tell our families. But 2 weeks later, Natalie started feeling weird, with nausea and extreme tiredness, and when she took the pregnancy test, it came out positive. I'm not going to lie, at first it was a shock because we weren't actively planning it, but after processing the news for like a day, we got super excited. We were going to have a baby, and even though the timing wasn't what we had imagined, I felt like everything was falling into place. We decided to have a dinner at our house to announce both pieces of news together, the engagement and the pregnancy. We invited my parents, Natalie's parents, and I also invited Matthew and Kimberly because, I don't know, I guess part of me still had hope that this could bring us closer together as a family again. My parents were super excited about the news. Mom literally cried with happiness, and Dad gave me this strong hug and told me he was proud of me, that I was going to be a great father. Natalie's parents were also super happy. Matthew and Kimberly arrived late, as expected, but at least they showed up. Everything was going well until, after the announcement and everyone toasted and congratulated us, Matthew and Kimberly asked to speak and said they also had news. Kimberly was pregnant. And okay, that should have been great. Like, our kids were going to be cousins of similar ages. It was nice news. But the way they said it was weird, like there was something more. And sure enough, after everyone congratulated them, Matthew added that they were going through a complicated financial situation because they had spent a lot of money on IVF treatments over the last few years, that they had basically exhausted their savings and had debts to the clinics. The atmosphere at the dinner changed completely. My parents, who are generous and obviously want to help their children, immediately started asking them how much they needed, how they could help. But Matthew and Kimberly said no, that they just wanted to share the news, that they were going to figure it out themselves. I realized that Kimberly was uncomfortable, like she didn't want to be having that conversation in front of everyone. And honestly, I also felt weird because it seemed like they had used my celebration to indirectly seek financial help from my parents. The dinner ended kind of tense. And when everyone left, Natalie and I stayed talking about how strange it had all been. She told me she thought Matthew and Kimberly had planned to use the family gathering to raise their economic situation. And I didn't want to think badly of my brother, but I had to admit that something didn't add up. And turns out I was right to be suspicious. Because 2 days later, Matthew showed up at my house without warning. Natalie was at work. I was working from home that day. And when I opened the door, Matthew came in and told me he needed to talk to me about something important. We sat down in the living room, and he started explaining that they were desperate about the money thing, that the IVF treatments had cost them like $80,000 total over 3 years, that they had bank loans, debts to the clinics, and that now with the baby on the way, the situation was unsustainable. And I told him, well, talk to Dad. He has money saved. He can surely help you. But then Matthew dropped the bomb on me. He told me that Dad wasn't going to give them money directly because he's angry with him for abandoning them all these years. That Mom wants to help, but Dad won't let her, because he says Matthew has to learn to solve his problems alone, since it was his decision to prioritize Kimberly's family. And then Matthew proposed something that left me frozen. He told me that I should ask Dad for money, telling him I needed it for my new business, and that when Dad gave me the money, I would pass it to him. He offered to split the money 60-40, where he would keep 60% to pay his debts, and I'd get 40% as a commission for helping him. I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. I said, "Are you asking me to deceive our parents? To lie to them about needing money for my business just so you can pay off your debts?" And he said yes, basically. That it was the only way because Dad would never give him money directly, but he would give it to me because I'm the son who stayed. The one who didn't abandon them. He used exactly those words, and it made me so angry to hear him admit that he knew he had hurt our parents, but that he still expected me to help him manipulate them. I told him no, that there was no way I was going to do that. I explained that first, I don't need money from Dad for my business because I already have investors. And second, even if I needed money, I would never lie to him about what it's for. I told him that if he really was sorry for abandoning the family, he should go directly to Dad, ask for forgiveness, rebuild the relationship, and then maybe Dad would be willing to help him. But Matthew got super defensive and told me I didn't understand his situation. That it was easy for me to judge him because I was always the perfect son. And that's when I got really angry because, seriously? I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes like anyone, but I never turned my back on my family. I never stopped calling Mom. I never missed important events without a valid reason. So I told him there was another thing I wasn't going to do, and that's make him a partner in my new business. Turns out Matthew also expected that, since we're brothers, I would automatically include him in my company as a partner, or at least give him an important position. And I told him clearly, no, that this business was my project, something I had worked on for years, and that I wasn't going to give away participation or positions just because of family nepotism, especially to someone who had proven to be unreliable over the last 5 years. Matthew left my house furious, slamming the door and yelling at me that I was going to regret it, that I was a shitty brother, that families should support each other unconditionally. And I stayed there feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and confusion. When Natalie came home that night and I told her everything, she hugged me and told me I had done the right thing, and that under no circumstances should I lie to my parents or include Matthew in my business if I didn't trust him. I thought that was the end of it all. But 2 weeks later, Matthew came back. This time he came alone, without Kimberly, and knocked on the door on a Sunday afternoon. I was with Natalie preparing lunch, and when I saw him, I thought, what does he want now? I opened the door and he came in with a completely different attitude, like calmer but also more determined. He sat down and started telling me this story about and how when I was applying to universities, he had given up his first choice university so I could go to mine, because our parents couldn't afford both at the same time. He told me he had been accepted to a super prestigious university in another state, but that he rejected it and went to a more economical local university so that Dad and Mom could pay for my college. And that's why I owed him, that I basically owed him my education and professional success because he had sacrificed his future for mine. He told me this, looking me in the eyes, super serious, and for a moment I felt guilty. Like, is this true? Did Matthew really make that sacrifice and I never knew? But something didn't add up, because I remembered that when Matthew graduated high school, he only applied to 2 universities. One of them was the local one where he ended up going, and the other was a moderately good but not prestigious university. I never heard anything about a super prestigious university in another state. So I asked him, which university exactly were you accepted to and rejected? And he gave me the name of a university that is indeed very good, like Ivy League level. But I still didn't remember him applying there, much less being accepted. I told him I needed to verify that with Mom and Dad because I didn't remember that story. And Matthew got nervous, started telling me it wasn't necessary, that they probably didn't remember because it was a long time ago, that the important thing was that I recognized the sacrifice he had made. But I was already completely suspicious, so I told him I was going to communicate with my parents anyway, and Matthew left again angry, saying I was ungrateful. That same afternoon, I went to my parents' house. They live like 20 minutes from where I live, in the same house where we grew up, a big, comfortable house in a quiet neighborhood. When I arrived, Mom was in the garden and Dad was in his study reading. I asked them directly about the story Matthew had. I told me if it was true that he had rejected a prestigious university so I could go to mine, and my parents' reaction confirmed everything. Mom looked confused and said, "What are you talking about?" And Dad laughed with irony and said, "Your brother is lying to you." Turns out Matthew did apply to that prestigious university, but he was never accepted. In fact, he was rejected, and when he found out about the rejection, he asked Dad to use his connections and money to bribe the university and get him in anyway. Dad explained to me that Matthew wanted him to donate an obscene amount of money to the university, like we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, to basically buy his admission. And Dad flatly refused, told him that was unethical, that if he hadn't been accepted on his own merits, then he should go to another university where they had accepted him. Matthew got really angry at that time, like 8 years ago now, and ended up going to the local university where he studied business. And apparently he held on to that resentment all these years, and now he had twisted it in his head to make me believe he had made a sacrifice for me, when in reality the truth was completely different. I felt betrayed, and also a bit relieved, because it confirmed that my instincts to distrust had been correct. I thanked my parents for telling me the truth, and told them about the proposal Matthew had made to deceive them, to get money from them. Dad got furious, like I had never seen him so angry. Mom started crying, not from anger but from sadness, saying where had she failed as a mother for Matthew to have become someone capable of manipulating his own family that way. I tried to comfort her, telling her it wasn't her fault, that Matthew was an adult who made his own decisions, but she still felt responsible. Dad told me I had done well not to go along with Matthew's game, and that he was going to take matters into his own hands. I blocked Matthew's number after that, because, honestly, I didn't want to have any more contact with him. I warned my parents about Matthew's plan, to ask them for money with some excuse, and asked them to be alert. I thought I could finally focus on my life, on Natalie, on the baby coming, on launching my company. But a week later, Matthew and Kimberly showed up at my house without warning, and this time they both came super aggressive. I was alone. Natalie had gone out to do some shopping, and when I opened the door, they basically pushed in without me inviting them. Matthew started yelling at me that I had ruined his life, that because of me, Dad no longer wanted to help them, that I was a selfish brother who only thought about himself. Kimberly also started attacking me, saying, "How could I be so cruel to deny them help when they were going to have a baby? That family should come first, that I had money and was being stingy." I told them to calm down, that they were in my house, and if they didn't lower their voices, I was going to bit them out. But they kept yelling. Matthew told me I would regret turning my back on him, that someday I would need help and he wouldn't be there. I literally had to push them out toward the door. It wasn't violent, like I didn't hit them or anything, but I had to use physical force to get them off my property. I closed the door with the lock and heard them outside yelling for a while longer until they finally left. I was shaking from the adrenaline and anger. I called my parents immediately and told them what had happened. Mom started crying again, and Dad told me he was going to talk to his lawyer about legal options if Matthew kept harassing me. The next day, Dad called Matthew and told him to come to his house because they needed to talk. I wasn't present at that conversation, but Mom told me later what happened. Dad basically told Matthew that his behavior was unacceptable, that he had crossed every possible boundary, and that he had two options. Either he apologized to me and them and started acting like a responsible adult, or Dad was going to take drastic measures regarding the family inheritance. Matthew got defensive and told Dad he couldn't threaten him with money, that was manipulation. And Dad responded that it wasn't manipulation, it was consequence. That if Matthew didn't respect his family, then he didn't deserve to benefit from it. Matthew left that meeting furious too. And a few days later, Dad's lawyer sent him a formal letter informing him that he was being removed from the will, except for some antique watch collections that Dad had promised him years ago. Everything else, the vacation home, the investments, the savings, was going to go to me and eventually to my child or children. The letter also mentioned that if Matthew tried to contact me again aggressively, they could proceed with a restraining order. I'm not going to lie. Part of me felt bad for Matthew when I found out about that. Yes, he had acted horribly. Yes, he had tried to manipulate me and use our parents, but he was still my brother, and I didn't like seeing him in that situation. But another part of me, the rational part, knew that he had completely brought it on himself and that actions have consequences. Like 3 weeks passed without hearing anything from Matthew or Kimberly. I kept focused on my life. Natalie was already like 15 weeks pregnant. We were starting to prepare the baby's room, and my shipping company had finally officially launched. The first contracts were coming in, things were going well professionally, and then, on a Saturday morning, Matthew showed up at my house again. This time he came alone, without Kimberly, and when I opened the door, his attitude was completely different. He looked tired, defeated, and he asked me please to let him in, that he needed to talk to me but promised not to yell or fight. I hesitated for a moment, but let him in. Natalie was home and stayed in the kitchen but could hear the conversation. Matthew sat on the couch and started talking, told me he came to apologize, that he had acted horribly, that he had been so desperate for money that he had lost perspective on what really mattered. He told me that Kimberly was devastated because she knew it was largely her fault that Matthew had distanced himself from the family and that now they were paying the consequences. He asked me to help him reconcile with Dad, to talk to him, to reconsider the inheritance thing. I asked him why I should help him after everything he had done. And Matthew told me because we're brothers, that despite everything we're still family, and that he was willing to do whatever was necessary to fix things. I told him I couldn't promise anything, but that I would talk to Dad. I also made it clear that our relationship was going to take a long time to repair, that trust isn't recovered overnight, and that he was going to have to prove with actions, not words, that he had really changed. That same afternoon, I went to see my parents and told them about Matthew's visit. Mom immediately wanted to forgive him. That's how she is, super maternal and compassionate. She can't see her children suffer without wanting to help. But Dad was more skeptical. He told me Matthew had already had many opportunities to do things right, and that he always chose the wrong path. I suggested that maybe they could give him one last chance, but with very clear conditions and consequences if he didn't meet them. Dad thought about it and then told me he had an idea. The next day, Dad called Matthew and told him to come to his house for a family meeting. I was also there, and when Matthew arrived, Dad made him sit down and basically humiliated him. He reminded him of all the times he had failed as a son, all the lies he had told, how he had tried to manipulate and use me. Matthew sat there taking it all without defending himself, which honestly was the right thing because everything Dad was saying was true. And then Dad did him a deal. He told him that if he really wanted to be part of the family again and eventually recover his place in the inheritance, he had to work to earn it. Literally, Dad told him I was launching my shipping company and that I needed employees, and that Matthew was going to work for me in an entry-level position without special privileges, earning a normal salary, and that for at least 2 years he had to prove he could be responsible, honest, and hardworking. If, after those 2 years, I gave a positive report about his performance and character, Dad would reconsider the inheritance situation. Matthew was frozen. He clearly didn't expect that. He looked at me and I just shrugged, like, I didn't plan this. It was Dad's idea. Matthew asked Dad if he was serious, and Dad told him completely serious that that was the only offer he was going to make, that either he took it or he left and didn't come back asking for anything. And then Matthew, after a long, uncomfortable silence, said, yes, that he accepted. Dad also told him that meanwhile he was going to help them with a loan for the most urgent debts, but that it was a formal loan with a contract and everything, not a gift, and that Matthew was going to have to pay it back with low interest, but interest nonetheless. Matthew accepted that too, and that's how my older brother ended up being my employee in my own company. I'm not going to lie, it was super weird at first. Matthew started working in the logistics department, doing basic coordination and administration work. I made it clear to him from day one that he wasn't going to get any special treatment for being my brother, that if he was late there would be consequences, that if he didn't meet his responsibilities, he was going to hear about it just like any other employee. And to Matthew's credit, so far he's been complying. He arrives on time, does his work, doesn't complain. Kimberly has also been more humble, according to what Mom tells me, although I haven't talked much with her directly. It's been like 4 months since all this. Natalie is already 7 months pregnant. We're about to find out the baby's sex next week. My company is growing. We have more clients than I expected for the first year. Matthew continues working, and so far there haven't been any serious problems. Dad and he are rebuilding their relationship slowly. They have dinners together every 2 weeks or so. Mom is happy to have both her sons back, although she knows things will never be like before. I still have mixed feelings about all this. On one hand, I'm glad Matthew is making a real effort to change and fix things. On the other hand, part of me is still angry about everything that happened. About the lies, about the manipulation, about the stress he caused during what was supposed to be a happy stage of my life. Natalie tells me it's normal to feel those things, that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and that it's okay for trust to be rebuilt little by little. Last week, Matthew came to my office after work and asked to talk in private. He told me he wanted to thank me for giving him this opportunity, that he knew he didn't deserve it, but that he was going to do everything possible to prove he could be a better person. He asked me if someday we could go back to being like before, like when we were younger. I told him honestly that I didn't know, that maybe yes, maybe no, but that what I did know was that we had to start from scratch and build something new, not try to recover something that no longer existed. He thought about it and then nodded, shook my hand, and left. I don't know how all this is going to end. I don't know if Matthew is really going to change long term, or if this is just temporary until he gets what he wants. I don't know if I'll ever trust him completely again. What I do know is that I did the right thing in not lying to my parents, in not letting myself be manipulated, and in setting clear boundaries. And I guess that's going to have to be enough for now.